The brown paper bag was giving up. First, it was a small tear, and then a full-on catastrophic split. A cascade of apples, a carton of eggs, and a head of lettuce tumbled onto the worn
I thought
carpet
these
of
might
the
brighten your
hallway.
day.
They're beautiful.
Alara let
Thank
out a
you.
sigh of
I'm glad you like
frustration,
them.
her shoulders slumping as she knelt to get the escapees. Of course this would happen now. It was the perfect messy end to a long, creatively draining week. As she reached for a rolling apple, she heard the familiar, quiet
thought these might
sound
brighten
of a
your day.
door opening
They're
down the
beautiful.
hall.
Thank you.
I'm glad you like
Apartment
them.
4A. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. Liam. Her heart did its usual stupid little flutter, a mix of hope and dread she'd gotten used to over 3 long years. She risked a glance. He was standing there, keys in hand, his tall frame silhouetted by the light from his apartment. For one breathless second, his gaze met hers. She saw a flicker of something in his dark eyes. Surprise? A question? Before it was gone, snuffed out like it had never been there at all. He looked away, his expression becoming a familiar, unreadable mask. He then just walked down the hall, his footsteps silent and measured. He didn't speed up, he didn't slow down. He simply walked past her scattered groceries and her kneeling form as if she were nothing more than a crack in the plaster. The click of his apartment door shutting felt like a final verdict. For 3 years, he looked at me like I was a ghost, a forgotten whisper in the hallways of our apartment building. I wasn't a neighbor, I was a piece of the architecture, something to be looked through, something to be moved around. I was the woman he never saw, until the day the flowers arrived. Living in apartment 4B, directly across the hall from Liam in 4A, felt like being part of a one-sided secret. I knew so many mundane things about him. I knew he left for work every morning at 7:45 a.m. on the dot, his briefcase a dark leather rectangle clutched in his hand. I knew he came home most evenings around 6:30, the scent of the city clinging to his coat for a fleeting moment in the hall. I knew he listened to classical music on Saturday afternoons. The faint, elegant sound of a piano would sometimes bleed through the walls when the building was quiet. These were the intimate details of proximity, the unwilling knowledge you gain from sharing a wall with a stranger. But in 3 years, the sum total of our interactions was 0. Not a single hello, not a polite nod in the elevator, not a shared weary smile in the laundry room while waiting for the spin cycle to finish. Nothing. In the beginning, I had tried. The first few weeks after I moved in, my default setting was friendly. I'd offer a bright good morning when our paths crossed by the mailboxes. He would simply stare straight ahead, his jaw tight, and keep going. I tried holding the main door for him once, and he walked right through without a word of acknowledgement, leaving me with my hand on the cold metal, feeling like an idiot. Slowly, my efforts withered under the relentless sun of his indifference. My bright greetings faded into a quiet, hopeful smile, which then just became a quick downward glance at my shoes whenever I heard his door open. It was easier than facing the sting of being so thoroughly and completely ignored. My mind, which is always making up stories thanks to my job as a freelance illustrator, started inventing narratives for him. At first, they were generous. Maybe he was tragically heartbroken, and the ghost of a lost love made all other women invisible to him. Maybe he was a brilliant, tortured artist, so lost in his own world that the rest of us were just blurs he chose to disregard. But as the months bled into years, my stories grew less charitable. Maybe he was just arrogant, convinced that the other residents of our modest building were beneath his notice. Or maybe there was something wrong with me. Was my smile too wide? Was I too eager? Did I radiate some kind of repellent energy that only he could detect? I'd stand in front of my mirror, turning my head from side to side, trying to see what he saw, or rather, what he refused to see. Our non-relationship became a fixed point in my daily life, this small, persistent ache. The elevator became a stage for our silent, awkward plays. If I saw him waiting, I'd sometimes pretend I'd forgotten something, turning back to my apartment just to avoid those 30 seconds of suffocating silence, watching the floor numbers light up one by one as he stared intently at his phone, or the ceiling, or anywhere but at me. The laundry room was another battleground of avoidance. I learned to time my visits for late on Sunday nights, hoping to miss him, only to have my heart sink when I'd find his basket of neatly folded clothes sitting on the folding table, a sign that I had just missed him or that he could show up at any moment. The only person who seemed to exist for him in our building was Mrs. Gable from 3B. She was a wonderfully kind woman in her 70s, with a cloud of white hair and a balcony garden that was the envy of the building. I'd see him nod at her, a brief, almost imperceptible dip of his head. Once, I even saw him hold the door for her, a gesture so shocking it felt like I'd just witnessed a solar eclipse. He didn't speak, but the action itself was a thunderclap in the silent world I had built around him. Mrs. Gable was always kind to me. She'd comment on my work when she saw me carrying portfolios, or ask about my family. "You work too hard, dear," she'd say, patting my arm. "You need to get out and enjoy the sunshine." I never told her about the ghost of apartment 4A, about the man who made me feel like a shadow. It felt too pathetic to admit out loud. It was a private hurt, a secret humiliation I carried with me every time I walked down my own hallway. My life was otherwise full. I loved my work, the freedom of creating worlds with ink and color. I had friends I saw for dinner, a family I called every Sunday. But my world had shrunk in some ways. Working from home meant that my apartment building took on an outsized importance. The hallways were my commute, the lobby was my water cooler, and the silent man in 4A was my constant, unavoidable colleague who pretended I didn't exist. After 3 years, I'd resigned myself to it. He was a fact of my life, a piece of immovable furniture. The tension, the hope, the hurt, it had all faded into a kind of dull acceptance. I was the ghost of apartment 4B, and he was the man who would never, ever see me. I'd finally stopped looking for him, stopped listening for his footsteps. I'd let him go, even though I'd never really had him in the first place.
It was a Tuesday afternoon. The sky was a flat, uninspired gray, and I was staring at a blank screen, trying to summon the inspiration to design a logo for a new brand of organic dog food. My mind was as blank as the canvas in front of me. The silence of my apartment was thick, broken only by the hum of the fridge and the distant city traffic. Then, a knock on the door, sharp and clear. Not the soft, hesitant knock of a delivery guy. This was firm. My brow furrowed. I wasn't expecting anyone. I saved my work, slid my chair back, and walked to the door, peering through the people. It was Mrs. Gable. She was standing there, but she wasn't alone. In her arms, she held a bouquet of flowers, so large and vibrant it seemed to block out the dim light of the hallway. They were peonies, a riot of soft pinks, deep fuchsias, and creamy whites, their petals bursting open in an extravagant show of beauty. I opened the door, a confused smile on my face. "Mrs. Gable? Are you all right?" She looked a little breathless, her cheeks flushed. "Oh, I'm fine, dear. Better than fine." She thrust the enormous bouquet towards me. "These are for you." I stared at the flowers, then back at her, my mind racing. "For me? But why? It's not my birthday." I took the bouquet automatically. The weight of it surprised me, and the fragrance was intoxicating, a sweet, peppery scent that filled my senses instantly. Peonies, my absolute favorite flowers. How could she have possibly known? "I know it's not your birthday, Alara," she said, her eyes twinkling with a secret she was bursting to share. "And they're not from me." My confusion deepened. "They're not? Then who?" My mind cycled through a short list of possibilities. My parents? My sister? A client? None of it made sense. Mrs. Gable leaned in a little closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It was the young man from 4A, Liam. The name hit me like a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had to have misheard her. It was impossible. Liam, the man who treated me like thin air, the man who wouldn't even meet my eyes in the elevator. "Liam?" I whispered the name, feeling how strange it was on my tongue. No, that can't be right. There must be a mistake. He probably meant for them to go to someone else. "No mistake, dear," she insisted, her smile widening. "He was very specific. Apartment 4B, Ilara. He was, Well, he was a wreck, if I'm being honest. Stood outside my door for a full 5 minutes before he worked up the nerve to knock. She chuckled softly. He asked me, begged me, really, if I would bring these to you. Said he was too much of a coward to do it himself. I just stood there, speechless, clutching the bouquet of impossible flowers. My mind was a whirlwind of denial and shock. Why? Why after 3 years of absolute soul-crushing silence would he do this? And why send them through Mrs. Gable? It was the most bizarre, confusing gesture I could possibly imagine. It felt like a prank, a dream, a scene from a movie I didn't know I was in. Mrs. Gable seemed to sense my turmoil. She reached out and gently patted the hand that was wrapped around the cool glass of the vase I just realized the flowers were in. He said this might help explain things, she said, pointing with her chin. I looked down. Tucked deep among the lush petals and green leaves was a small, cream-colored envelope. My name, Ilara, was written on the front in this precise, elegant handwriting I'd never seen before. He seemed like a good boy, just shy, Mrs. Gable said softly, giving my arm a final reassuring squeeze. You enjoy the flowers, dear. With that, she turned and walked back toward the stairwell, leaving me alone in my doorway. The scent of the peonies was overwhelming, a sweet, fragrant contradiction to the years of cold silence. The vibrant colors felt loud in my neutral-toned apartment. I stepped back inside and closed the door, the click echoing the one I had heard just a day before when he had walked past my spilled groceries. But this time, the sound didn't feel like a final verdict. It felt like a question. I placed the vase on my small dining table, and the flowers instantly transformed the entire room. They were a living, breathing presence in my quiet space, and in the heart of them was that note, a tiny paper key that promised to unlock a 3-year-old mystery. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. I stared at the envelope, at my name written in his hand, and I was afraid. Afraid to open it, and even more afraid not to.
For a full 10 minutes, I did nothing but stare at the envelope. It felt like a tiny bomb, and I was terrified of what would happen when it went off. Every possible explanation ran through my head, each more ridiculous than the last. Was it an apology for a noise complaint I never made? Was he moving out? Was this all some elaborate, cruel joke? My mind, so used to his silence, couldn't process this sudden, fragrant noise. Finally, I couldn't stand it a second longer. My hands trembled as I carefully pulled the envelope from its hiding place. The paper was thick, expensive. I turned it over and broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of matching paper, folded in half. Unfolding it, I saw the same neat, slightly slanted handwriting. I took a deep, shaky breath, full of the scent of peonies, and began to read. Ilara, I am almost certain that this note and the flowers that came with it will come as a shock to you. To say my behavior toward you has been confusing would be the understatement of the century, and for that, I am profoundly sorry. Please let me try, however inadequately, to explain. The first thing you must know is that I am not arrogant or rude or unkind. At least, I hope I'm not. What I am is a coward. I suffer from a social anxiety that can be, at times, completely paralyzing. It's something I've dealt with my entire life. In professional settings, I can manage. I have a script, a role to play. But in personal situations, with people who matter, the words get stuck. My mind goes completely blank, and all I can do is freeze. And from the first day I saw you, you mattered. You were moving in. You were arguing with the movers about a scuffed bookshelf, and you had a smudge of dirt on your cheek, and you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. I wanted to walk over, introduce myself, offer to help. Instead, I stood frozen in my doorway, and then retreated inside, my heart hammering against my ribs. That was the beginning of my 3 years of failure. I know you think I don't see you. The truth is, I see everything. I see the way you tuck your hair behind your ear when you're concentrating on unlocking your door. I see the little, frustrated sigh you let out when the elevator takes too long. I've seen you come home with charcoal smudges on your fingers and known you've had a productive day drawing. I've noticed the series of brightly colored sneakers you wear. I know you hum very softly when you collect your mail, especially when you get a package. I know your favorite flowers are peonies, because for a month last spring, a picture of a single pink peony was the background on your laptop, which I glimpsed once for 2 seconds when the elevator doors opened on my floor. I have spent 3 years noticing every small, wonderful detail about you, and I have spent 3 years hating myself for my own silence. Every good morning you offered that I failed to return felt like a physical blow. Every time I walked past you without a word, I would go into my apartment and curse myself for my weakness. You weren't invisible to me, Alara. You were the exact opposite. You were so blindingly present that you short-circuited my entire brain. Ignoring you wasn't an act of malice. It was an act of profound, pathetic fear. Yesterday, I saw you in the hall with your spilled groceries. I wanted to rush over and help. I wanted to kneel down, gather your things, and finally say something, anything. But I couldn't. I walked away, and the sound of my door closing felt like the biggest failure of my life. I decided I couldn't let another day, another year pass like this. I can't live in this silent, self-made prison anymore. I asked Mrs. Gable for help because I trust her kindness, and frankly, I didn't trust myself not to run away. This is my white flag, my surrender, a desperate attempt to undo 3 years of being a fool. If you've read this far, thank you. I don't expect you to understand, and I certainly don't expect your forgiveness. But I have to ask, would you be willing to have coffee with me sometime? We can go to a place far from this hallway. I promise I have words. I've just been saving them all for you. Yours, in hope, Liam. I read the letter once, then twice, then a third time, my eyes blurring with tears. The entire story I had built around this man, the arrogant, cold, dismissive neighbor, crumbled into dust. It wasn't about me, it was about him, his fear, his anxiety, his silence. He wasn't ignoring me, he was hyper-aware of me. He hadn't seen through me, he had seen me, all of me, the little details no one else ever noticed. A tidal wave of emotions just washed over me. There was shock, a dizzying feeling of the world tilting on its axis. There was a deep, aching sympathy for the man who had been fighting this silent battle just across the hall. And underneath it all, a tiny, fragile seed of warmth began to bloom in my chest, a feeling so hopeful it almost hurt. I looked at the wall that separated our apartments. For 3 years, it had been a barrier of cold indifference. Now I understood it was a barrier of fear. He was over there, right now, probably pacing his floor, terrified of my reaction. I had to do something. My first instinct was to write back, but that felt too distant. My second was to knock on his door, but that felt too confrontational. I needed a bridge, a gesture as gentle as his. My eyes landed on the half-eaten batch of chocolate chip cookies on my counter from the day before. It was a simple offering, a quiet response. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear, it was from anticipation. I arranged a few of the best-looking cookies on a small plate, took a deep breath, and walked out of my apartment. I crossed the few feet of hallway that felt like a mile for 3 years and stood before the door of 4A. For a moment, I hesitated. What if the letter was a lie? What if this was all some strange game? No, the vulnerability in that letter felt too raw, too real. I raised my hand and knocked. The seconds stretched on. I could hear faint movement inside, then silence. I was about to lose my nerve and turn back when the lock clicked and the door opened a few inches. Liam stood there, peering through the crack. He looked terrified. His eyes were wide, his face pale. He was just as scared as his letter described. "Hi," I said, softly, my voice barely a whisper. He just stared at me, his mouth slightly open as if he couldn't believe I was actually there. I started, holding up the plate. "I got your flowers. They're beautiful. Thank you." I extended the plate of cookies toward him. His fingers brushed against mine for a fraction of a second. A jolt like static electricity shot up my arm. His hand was trembling. "Thank you," he murmured, his gaze fixed on the cookies. he still couldn't quite meet my eyes. An awkward silence fell between us, but it was different from the silences in the elevator. This one wasn't cold and empty. It was filled with unspoken questions, with fragility and a new hope. "So," I said, breaking the quiet, "about that coffee. I'm free on Friday." His head snapped up, and for the first time, he looked directly at me, and I saw it all there. The relief, the surprise, the genuine, breathtaking joy that lit up his face. A slow, brilliant smile spread across his face. It transformed him completely. "Friday?" he repeated, the word full of wonder. "Friday is perfect." Our first coffee date was a study in beautiful awkwardness. We met at a small cafe a few blocks away, neutral territory. When I walked in, he was already at a corner table, nervously shredding a napkin. He stood up so quickly when he saw me that he nearly knocked over his chair. The first 10 minutes were stilted. He stared into his mug like it held the secrets of the universe, his knuckles white. I did most of the talking, filling the silence with stories about my latest project, terrified that the man from the letter had vanished again. But then I asked him about his job as an architect. A switch flipped. He started talking about his passion for sustainable design, for light and texture, and the poetry of a well-designed staircase. His voice grew steady and passionate. The quiet, anxious man was gone, replaced by someone brilliant and thoughtful. We talked for 2 hours. We discovered a shared love for old black and white movies and a mutual hatred for cilantro. He had a dry, subtle wit that made me laugh when I least expected it. As we said goodbye at my door, he actually met my eyes and smiled. "Thank you, Alara. This was more than I hoped for." But progress isn't a straight line, is it? After that high, 2 days of silence fell. No text, no knock. Doubt, that familiar and unwelcome guest, started creeping back. Had I said something wrong? Was the reality of me a disappointment? The hurt was sharper this time, because now I knew what I was missing. I ended up confiding in Mrs. Gable. I explained the letter, the great date, and the deafening silence that followed. She listened patiently. "My dear," she said, patting a geranium, "a man like that is like a shy forest creature. You can't charge at it or it will bolt. You have to be still. You have to be patient. Let it come to you when it feels safe." That evening, my phone finally buzzed. It was a text from Liam. "Liam, I am so sorry for being quiet. I'm not ghosting you. The opposite, actually. The coffee was so good, so much better than I ever imagined, that I've spent the last 48 hours completely terrified of messing it up. It's stupid, I know. I'm working on it."
After that night, the last wall between us crumbled for good. My conversation with Mark was brief and final. He couldn't wrap his head around why I'd choose quiet and complicated over his brand of easy charm, which honestly just proved I'd made the right choice. Our lives began to merge in the most beautiful, ordinary ways. The hallway between 4A and 4B was no longer a chasm, but a well-worn path. Mornings weren't a game of avoidance anymore. Now, Liam would wait for me, leaning against his door frame with 2 coffees in hand and a quiet smile. Awkward elevator rides became chances to steal a quick kiss. The other residents, who'd been silent witnesses to our years of non-interaction, started giving us these knowing, happy smiles. Mrs. Gable looked on like a proud godmother. One evening, about 6 months later, I came home from a frustrating meeting, juggling my portfolio, my purse, and a grocery bag that was threatening to tear. As I fumbled for my keys, I heard his door open. For a second, I braced myself for a flashback to that day. But this time was different. Liam was there in an instant. "Here, let me get that," he said, his voice warm and steady. He expertly took the grocery bag and my heavy portfolio. He freed my hands so I could unlock my door. The entire gesture was so effortless, a quiet ballet of partnership. As I pushed the door open, I paused and looked at him, standing in the same hallway where he once pretended I didn't exist,
now laden with my things. The memory of that other day hung between us, not as a ghost, but as a landmark, a testament to how far we had come. He must have seen it in my eyes, because a soft smile touched his lips. He leaned in, shifting the groceries, and kissed me. A long, slow, tender kiss right there in the hallway. It was a kiss that rewrote history, turning a place of hurt into a place of homecoming. Later that night, we were curled up on my sofa. The vase that had held the peonies still sat on my bookshelf, now filled with wildflowers he'd picked for me. The quiet between us was comfortable, as eloquent as any conversation. He turned to me. "You know," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "for 3 years I practiced. Almost every morning I'd stand in front of my mirror and say, 'Hello, Alara. It's a nice day.' Sometimes I'd even try, 'Hi, I'm Liam from 4A. He let out a small, self-deprecating laugh. "I had a dozen opening lines, but every single time I saw you, it was like a switch flipped off in my brain. The words just vanished." I reached up and touched his face. I looked into his eyes, no longer filled with fear, but with a deep, steady love. "You don't have to practice anymore," I said softly. "You don't have to say anything at all. I can hear you just fine now." He leaned in and kissed me again, and in that quiet, comfortable space, I knew I was finally, completely home. A love hidden in silence, finally given a voice by a simple bouquet of flowers. What did you think of Alara and Liam's story? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. For more incredible stories of love against the odds, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You can also check out our playlist of our most popular short story audiobooks right here. It's just an amazing reminder that sometimes the quietest people have the loudest hearts, absolutely filled with feelings they're just waiting for the right person to share them with. Alara and Liam's story really shows that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, even in the silent hallways we walk down every single day. It's a story about patience, about looking past the surface and holding on to that beautiful idea that the person who seems to see right through you might actually be the one who sees you most of all.